So there's a small country in the Baltic region known as Estonia. Estonians, since 13th century, were oppressed by their neighboring countries for over 800 years. Last time they were oppressed was by the former Soviet Union. So what happened is that back in 1947, when they were able to do their own singing festival, they sang a beautiful song that has been passed down for many years. They sang a song based on a poem called "The Land of My Father's Land That I Love." And they somehow slipped through the Soviet censorship because it sounded like just like any other folk song. So people sang together. By 1950, the Soviets caught on. They knew what this song was all about, and it was forbidden from them to sing the song. Fast forward to many years later, 1988, when they were doing, once again, singing festival. 300,000 Estonians gathered together and sang this song in unison. And this song became the anthem of their independence. Soviets tried to stop them from singing, but the harder they tried, the louder they sang. It was one song that united the entire nation. By singing their song through a very peaceful protest, they were able to break free from the Soviets. So by 1991, when the Soviet former USSR fell, they gained their independence. Despite the fact that for 800 years, they were constantly being oppressed, they never forgot who they were. They kept their identity and their hope alive. What we see in the Old Testament scriptures is that every time the people were taken away, the people of God went to Assyria, they went to Babylonia, and then when God said, "You guys can come back," some of them didn't want to come back. Why? Because they became too comfortable. They married foreign wives, and they built their business. They had their beautiful home, amassed a lot of wealth. They didn't want to lose that. They didn't want to come back. The Estonians knew who they were. They kept their identity alive. And that's what God is asking us to do. Although we live in Canada, we're Canadians, we might be ethnically whatever country we're from, we are primarily God's people. And Jesus is our King. We are citizens of God's kingdom first. So what kind of king was Jesus? He certainly wasn't an earthly king, because earthly kings usually have their territory, they have their castles, they have their jewels, and the royal scepter, and then army and the weapons. Jesus didn't have any of that. Instead, the way in which Jesus was mocked, taunted, and crucified, the Roman citizens couldn't be treated this way. So we know St. Paul, he died of beheading, because that would have been very, very quick, very, very merciful way of dying, because it was quick death. Because crucifixion is the most humiliating and painful way to die known to humankind. Slave class and worse criminals could only be crucified. And that's how we treated Christ our King. That's how humanity treated him. He was mocked. If you are really the Son of God, if you are who you say you are, come down from the cross. Save yourself. Well, Jesus didn't come to save himself. He came to sacrifice himself, and by doing so, to save us from our sins. He came to defeat the kingdom of darkness. He came to destroy sin and death. And Christ came to empower each and every one of us to break away from the kingdom of darkness by overcoming sin and death in our own lives. Something that we probably don't think about, but one thing is this. Sometimes we struggle through our sins the tendencies that we have, our weaknesses or vulnerabilities, whatever you want to call it, that may be bigger than ourselves. It might be something that your parents, your grandparents, and for many generations, people might have been suffering from. So sometimes gambling addictions run in the family. Spousal abuses, alcoholism, addiction to substance, even infidelity. And some of these things run in the family, happens over and over and over again. And if your family is suffering from that tendency, I think it's because God has chosen you to break away from that cycle. Jesus gives us that power to interrupt and break away from the cycle that has been plaguing your family for many, many generations. God's grace can help you to overcome that. And when we do, we will no longer pass on that vulnerability to our children and children's generation. Because sometimes the greatest act of love that we can show to others is to become an example that other people need to see. Something that I'm sure that you've all noticed is that people say, "Father, you're losing a lot of weight." Well, I've been on a diet since September, and I lost about 35 pounds, and it's time for shopping now because none of my clothes fit anymore. And people say, "How long did it take you to lose weight?" I said, "Years." Well, what do you mean? Well, it only took me 2 months of diet to lose weight, but it also took me many years of preparation. I don't know if you know me. I'm a foodie. I love to eat. So it's like to saying no to food, eating out, saying no to occasional alcohol, and these things were just too difficult for me to give up. I didn't want to give up. That's why I stayed the way that I was until I did my blood work and my doctor said, "Well, you are at a high risk for stroke or heart attack. You're too young to be going through stuff like that." I said, "Well, okay, rather than taking pills, I want to change my lifestyle." So it's not just a diet, because I realized along with the change of diet came change of my lifestyle, way of my living. That's when I learned our power does not come from our ability to do whatever we want, but our true power comes from ability to say no to ourselves. Of course, Jesus, in his vulnerable moments, he prayed to God the Father, "Please take this cup away from me, but not my will, but your will be done." Same thing with every single one of us. Of course, we want things to be done our way. But Jesus shows us a supreme example of what it means to honor and love God the Father. Jesus is our King. Is he your King? Does he have authority over you? Do you listen to yourself, or do you listen to what Jesus is telling you?